In a faraway land, there lived a man named Mr. Felix. He was a wealthy man and had everything he desired. Mr. Felix lost his dear wife 12 months ago and decided to marry again after taking advices from friends and families. He got married to a beautiful woman named Sylvia. Sylvia was a giver. She enjoys helping the needy and also loves putting smiles on people's faces. But her husband was otherwise. He was a stingy man. One fateful day, Mr. Felix was sitting in his living room reading a newspaper when he heard a knock on the door and ordered his housekeeper to open it. She opened the door. Then a man named Mr. Kelechi walked to meet his friend Mr. Felix. He shook hands with Mr. Felix and greeted him, but Mr. Felix only remained quiet, hoping in his heart that Mr. Kelechi wouldn't request for help. Mr. Kelechi asked him why he was quiet, and his only response was that he was feeling sleepy. Then he continued by asking Mr. Kelechi what brought him to his home. But Mr. Kelechi didn't go straight to the point. Instead, he requested for food, saying, as an Igbo man, he was hungry. Mr. Felix got almost irritated by his statement, so he told him that he didn't have any food in his house and that he was more hungry. So, Mr. Kelechi, knowing fully well that his friend wasn't willing to give him any food, went ahead to tell him his aim for coming. "My daughter just got admission," Mr. Kelechi said happily, though he got a bit afraid of asking his friend due to the odd look Mr. Felix was giving him, but decided to continue, since Mr. Felix was his only hope. He said he had the school fees already and that he was told to pay acceptance fee and that he didn't have the money. But Mr. Felix told him he wasn't sure that Mr. Kelechi was ready to send his daughter to school. "How can you not know about acceptance fee?" Mr. Felix asked. Then he told Mr. Kelechi that maybe he should wait till next year, that he shouldn't send his daughter to school when he doesn't have the funds. Then he continued and said he was broke and that he didn't have any money, and also he was not able to help. He said he wished he could, but he couldn't. On the other hand, Mr. Kelechi, knowing that his friend wasn't saying the truth, tried to be more persistent, but Mr. Felix only repeated the same thing. Then Mr. Kelechi left very disappointed, and Mr. Felix headed straight to his room. 2 days later, Mr. Felix was coming out of a mall, and just when he got to his car, a beggar approached him, telling him she had not eaten for 2 days already, and then she begged him to help her with food. But Mr. Felix, who was already irritated, ignored her. But when she became more persistent, he squeezed out 100 naira note and threw it at her face. Then he drove off, after swearing to himself that he would never go near that mall again. Few minutes later, he got home and gave his wife all the gifts he got her, and she thanked him. He got her a necklace made of pure gold and other luxurious items, and she was really happy. And after some minutes, she started talking to him about how she was going to give out some of her old clothes, but her husband didn't buy the idea. He said it wasn't necessary and that she should keep them. When Sylvia heard all of his statements, she got annoyed and tried talking to him on how God rewards givers, but he only said he was just being himself and that people who give are only about what God will give them in return. They are eye service people, he concluded, and walked out, while his wife remained there disappointed, and after some time, she left. Few weeks later, an old friend of Sylvia visited her, and of course, Sylvia welcomed her with open arms. Her friend's name was Chinaza. Chinaza came with her only daughter, and Sylvia was happy to have them. While Mr. Felix, who was right there in the living room, watched everything and got really pissed. Sylvia introduced her guest to her husband, but Mr. Felix only gave an awkward look after forcing a smile, which only his wife observed well. Chinaza's daughter, Peace, kept on admiring the house and kept on saying she'd love to live there someday. And Sylvia didn't have a problem with that, which got Mr. Felix irritated. He kept on being grumpy, but everyone ignored him. After some time, Peace said that she was hungry, and immediately Sylvia rushed to get food for them after apologizing for the delay. And when she left, Mr. Felix queried Mrs. Chinaza for not feeding her child before coming to his house. Then he said some hurtful words after concluding that she only came for the aim of food and that no man would ever find her interesting with her low self-esteem. Then he walked out. When Sylvia walked to the living room to inform everyone that food was ready, she found no one and was shocked. She tried reaching her friend, but her line wasn't available. Then she rushed to her room to meet her husband, who she saw on their bed relaxing. "Where did my guest go to?" she asked him, knowing he was somehow behind it, but he told her he didn't have any idea. "Maybe they went to the next house," he said, and she got pissed and asked him if he said anything at all to her. Then he said he only told her the truth, and that got Sylvia really angry, knowing fully well that her husband would have said something really hurtful. Then she said to him that he's got serious issues, and she walked out after slamming the door behind her. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning, Sylvia was preparing to go to church. She tried convincing her husband to join her, but he said God lives in the hearts, not in the church building, and that he wouldn't go. Meanwhile, his real intentions for not going was because he didn't want anyone following him around asking him for help, so he decided to stay home. Then he promised his wife he would pray at home, so she left. She went to church, and after service, she was saying hello and greeting some of her co-members when she started feeling some sharp pains around her stomach. So she tried to manage herself till she gets home, but the pains became unbearable, so she screamed for help, and few of her co-members rushed her to the hospital. When Mr. Felix heard about the news, he quickly rushed to the hospital to stay with his wife, after telling the members that he could take it off from there, so they excused them. Mr. Felix was full of joy. He couldn't stop rejoicing in the hospital. Even after they got discharged, he kept thanking anyone he sees. He was excited that wherever he finds himself, he would dance in joy, regardless of the location. Some weeks later, they discovered it was a baby girl, so they decided to go shopping for her. Mr. Felix bought everything he knew his little princess would ever need, even when she gets to age 3. He got everything down out of excitement. Sometimes, his wife would tell him to take it easy, but he would insist and go for shopping every day. He became a man of joy, but still didn't stop his stingy acts. 6 years later, Princess was already all grown. She was still their only child, and was very attached to her dad. Her father would do anything for her, and she loved him for that. Both of them were very close buddies, and the family was full of joy until one day when Mr. Felix was about to leave his company to head home. And just as he approached his car, a poor man walked to him and begged him for 200 naira so he could buy drugs for his dying daughter. But Mr. Felix refused and got into his car immediately. And as soon as he reversed with speed, due to the fact that he didn't want the beggar to be persistent, he accidentally hit a woman who was pregnant, and immediately she fell to the ground and died. Mr. Felix couldn't believe his eyes, and out of fear, he drove off with speed. And throughout that day, he locked himself in his room because he didn't know how to face his wife and break the news to her. The next day, 2 police officers came to his house and arrested him. Sylvia was confused, but Mr. Felix only went quietly with them. The husband of the dead woman took the matter to court and won, so Mr. Felix got a life imprisonment for murdering 2 people at a time. Sylvia was shocked to her bones after hearing all that really happened, and also how the beggar lost his daughter because he couldn't get money for drugs for her. Sylvia's heart was mixed with anger and sadness. She was angry about her husband's foolish actions and was sad because she would no more have him by her side again. She visited and poured out her emotions to him. She reminded him of the time she advised him and he didn't listen. And later that evening, she left in tears. Day after day, she would go visit him, taking food with her, and that was how Mr. Felix lived in prison for the rest of his life.